You have a choice whether you're an institutional investor or an individual. You can either adopt Bitcoin because you think it's going to succeed, it's going to be the biggest form of money in the world, it's going to absorb everything, or you can reject it because you think it's going to fail. Unfortunately, if you reject Bitcoin, I think your beliefs are going to die with you. Vanguard recently chose to survive. It didn't want to die with its beliefs. It let go of its ego. And in this video, I want to explain to you what exactly I mean by this. Let's get started. I made this post when Bitcoin ETFs were first approved by the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission. You can see here, Wall Street doesn't control Bitcoin. Bitcoin controls Wall Street. Vanguard is a massive financial firm that doesn't allow investors to get exposure to Bitcoin ETFs. I think this will change within a couple of years. So I said within a couple of years because of pressure from clients. Bitcoin's characteristics make it a much better investment than index funds, meaning money will move to institutions that do offer a Bitcoin ETF. And that's exactly what happened today. Everyone eventually bends the knee to Bitcoin. You can see here, this is Vanguard, Vanguard's non-Vanguard funds. I'll zoom out a little bit. IBIT, they are now offering Bitcoin ETFs. They said so confidently that they're not going to offer Bitcoin ETFs. And now it seems like they've changed their minds. And I think that this was a huge mistake from Vanguard in the first place. Bitcoin is now up 110%. I wanted to explain my thoughts on why I think that Vanguard finally capitulated, why they finally accepted Bitcoin as a asset, as collateral, why they're finally allowing their customers to buy Bitcoin. The main goal of Vanguard as a company is to help its clients buy assets and to build a long-term investing portfolio that allows them to retire, that allows them to be financially free. That's their goal. They offer extremely low fee index funds. So let's say, for example, VOO, they only charge 0.04%. The next best S&P 500 ETF is SPY. It charges 0.0945%. So the difference in that fee is massive. I wanted to quickly pause this video to mention that I do one-on-one meetings and I have a private community where you can join for extra content. If you want to access either of those, you can check the link in the pinned comment or in the description below. One of the reasons why I think that Vanguard capitulated to Bitcoin is that they see with BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF, there are already $66 billion of assets under management. So number one, they could create their own Bitcoin ETF and they could offer it. They could charge a lower management expense ratio. Bitcoin is just starting here. You have to keep that in mind. We are at the beginning of the race. Vanguard capitulated early. Bitcoin is going so much higher from where it is today. There's only $66 billion of value, and in the BlackRock ETF, this is going to be $650 billion. It's going to be $6 trillion. It's going to keep rising literally forever. And Vanguard caught it before the 100x has happened. At some point, Bitcoin is going to run out at every single price, no matter what happens, no matter what price it's at. Bitcoin's price is going to keep rising and rising and rising until at one point it's no longer valued in dollars. And all these numbers will just be based on how much Bitcoin they hold. The dollar value won't matter because Bitcoin is the biggest asset in the world. It can replace the US dollar as money. And at that point, these ETFs will probably just charge you a custodian fee. So think about it this way. Vanguard has caught this before it's even a $5 trillion asset, before it's a $10 trillion asset, before it's a $100 trillion asset. And at some point, BlackRock is just going to be able to take a certain percentage of their clients' Bitcoin as a fee. So right now they have 775,000 Bitcoin. That's what they're holding out of the 21 million. So Vanguard wants a spot in that. Let's say they create that ETF. They start collecting fees in terms of fiat now. And then when Bitcoin becomes that globally accepted store of value, they can just charge Bitcoin fees. So they can charge 1% of your stack or 0.25% or 0.1%, 0.01%, whatever the fee is, they can charge that to their customers. And that's a recurring revenue that will be there literally forever, because there's always going to be people who don't want to take self-custody. There was always going to be people who want to have backstops. Let's say if something happens to them, if something happens to their Bitcoin stack, if something happens to their multi-sig, they still have some Bitcoin that's held by another institution that basically protects them in case they make a mistake. That's one of the things that you have to accept with Bitcoin. If you make mistakes, you lose it. BlackRock right now is there using Coinbase. They hold their Bitcoin with Coinbase. They're using Coinbase. So BlackRock is there and Coinbase is there to offer you that protection, basically insurance. I think that Vanguard wants a part of this. At some point, they'll probably start offering Bitcoin ETFs. But then the other reason why Vanguard is capitulating is because you can now borrow against these Bitcoin ETFs. The ETF provider earns 0.25% on whatever assets they hold for you. But then when somebody borrows against those assets, let's say Vanguard has those ETFs on its platform, you can borrow against those ETFs. Vanguard can now charge you 5, 6, 7, 8, 9% in interest. They can use the cash balances of their customers, lend them to you, and earn a spread on whatever they're paying their customers versus what they're lending that money to you at, whatever rate they're lending it at. And then with Bitcoin growing so fast, a lot of loans will never have to be paid because the LTV will go so low. So Vanguard creates a consistent cash flow until fiat is dead. So people will continue borrowing against their Bitcoin ETFs. At some point, they won't even have to pay it back. And Vanguard will continue to collect the interest on those loans, and that revenue stream never ends. Nobody can change Bitcoin. Nobody can stop Bitcoin from going in the direction that it's going. Nobody can stop Bitcoin from being used as money. Nobody can stop anybody else from accessing Bitcoin. One of the biggest issues that Vanguard probably faced as a result of this is people moving their accounts, their investment accounts, from Vanguard to other brokerages that allow them to buy the Bitcoin ETFs. I don't think those customers are coming back, but going forward, Vanguard would continue to lose more and more customers if they don't offer their customers Bitcoin ETFs, and more of the customers figure out what Bitcoin is and they want Bitcoin and they can't access it, so they will leave. Keep in mind that Vanguard is only 2 years behind the other brokerages that already have customers who are holding Bitcoin ETFs. And that's perfectly fine because there are going to be other brokerages that come after them, new brokerages that come after them. There's going to be other companies that finally figure out what Bitcoin is that come after them. And those companies are also going to want Bitcoin. This is one of the things that holds back a lot of individuals from buying Bitcoin as well. They have this authority bias where if the people who they trust don't want Bitcoin, then they don't want Bitcoin as well. A lot of people rejected Bitcoin and they said that they wouldn't want to hold Bitcoin because Vanguard doesn't offer Bitcoin ETFs. And there must be a reason for that. Are those people now going to also bend the knee to Bitcoin? Are they going to finally capitulate? I don't know if Vanguard is going to catch up to BlackRock with BlackRock's 775,000 Bitcoin stack, but they're going to benefit from Bitcoin regardless of whether they catch up or not. Now it's Vanguard's customers' responsibility to figure out what Bitcoin is and to start buying, because let's say, for example, people who can buy one Bitcoin today don't do it. At some point, they won't be able to afford one Bitcoin because there won't be one Bitcoin available at the price that they're willing to pay. Bitcoin runs out at every single price. No matter what happens, Bitcoin's price will keep rising because there's a finite supply of Bitcoin. And as the people who bought Bitcoin in, let's say, 2010, 2015, 2016 rotate out of Bitcoin into other assets, they're selling their Bitcoin to new investors who have a much higher cost basis. So Bitcoin's price needs to go much higher for them to sell. You also have to keep in mind that at all times, there are individuals who are buying Bitcoin who have a 10-year time horizon, a 15-year time horizon, a 20, 30, 50-year time horizon. Some people are never going to sell that Bitcoin again. So once that supply is taken out of the market, it's not going to come back for at least a few years, and that's a guarantee. Of course, there is always going to be whales who are selling. People who have thousands of Bitcoin, they're going to keep selling and they're going to keep selling. That's perfectly fine. That's just a redistribution. That's how Bitcoin's network grows. If nobody was willing to sell their Bitcoin for dollars, then keep in mind that you wouldn't be able to buy it. And that's to your advantage. There are people out there who don't want to hold the Bitcoin that they have. They want to own other assets. Maybe they don't see Bitcoin's future being as bright as it was in the past. And that's perfectly fine. It just means that there's a new, more enthusiastic group of buyers purchasing Bitcoin and they're willing to hold until it reaches much, much higher prices. One of the things that holds people back from buying Bitcoin is this phrase, Bitcoin has no utility. It's true that Bitcoin doesn't have physical utility, but it does have utility. It does have a use case. You can see here, food and water have utility and they have value, as people would say, because they're fundamental to your life. You can't survive without food and water. Shelter and clothes also have utility and value because they protect you from nature. You wear clothes if it's cold. You want to protect yourself from other people. You live in a house. Your things are protected. Cars have utility because they allow us to move from one place to another. So a lot of people have just assumed that because Bitcoin doesn't have any physical utility, you can't really do anything with it physically because it's not a physical thing. People have assumed that Bitcoin doesn't have any value and they haven't capitulated yet. I personally think that the growth that's ahead of us is much, much bigger than the growth that we already went through. There are a lot more people who don't have Bitcoin, even today, than the number of people who actually do have Bitcoin. So all these people, when they figure out that Bitcoin doesn't need to have physical utility to be used as money, are going to want Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has digital utility and value. This is a complete change from how people see the world, how people think, how people actually expect the world to work. Bitcoin doesn't have physical utility, of course, because it's not physical. It's the easiest explanation. There's no physical utility because it's not physical, and that's perfectly fine. You have data on your phone. That's not physical, but you still value it. It has utility. Most people are used to seeing physical utility. They're used to being able to hold utility. That's why a lot of people like gold. They like real estate. You can actually touch a house. You can live in a house, whatever they want to say. They have physical utility. You can use gold in industrial processes. All that utility is really important, of course. But the way that Bitcoiners look at utility is from a different perspective. But before you can understand what Bitcoin is, you need to see what the problem is in the first place. The problem is that the current form of money that we have is designed to keep us working forever. It's designed to make us slaves to this financial system because we need to borrow money to buy anything. On a Bitcoin standard, that would be changed because nobody can debase our money. Nobody can create new money out of thin air and destroy the value of all of the savings that we have. So I went on with this post. Bitcoin is perfect money. It's the only relevant digital good that can't be replicated. There are other altcoins, of course, but a lot of those altcoins have a lot of problems. The people promoting them are not going to tell you what those problems are, of course. You can use Bitcoin as a store of value without being worried about it being confiscated or debased, unlike the US dollar. The US dollar is constantly being confiscated, it's constantly being debased. And countries can use Bitcoin to save. What this means is that they can put their sovereign wealth funds into Bitcoin. That's the most valuable thing that you can do. The entire country's savings are being put into this thing because it can't be confiscated or debased. For example, Russia had $300 billion worth of their savings confiscated from them when they invaded Ukraine. The US weaponized their ability to control Russia's financial system. They stole $300 billion from Russia because they could. Why wouldn't they if they could? I don't want to make this political at all, but think of the value there. If you can have your money stolen from you, then why wouldn't that money be stolen from you? That's exactly what's happening right now. That's why you can't afford the same lifestyle as your parents, your grandparents, your great grandparents. Your parents were probably able to afford a house and two kids and a car pretty easily, but you can't even buy a condo. The problem there is that the US dollar is being stolen from you. And once you realize this, you can start seeing the value of Bitcoin. You can also send and receive value with Bitcoin from anywhere to anywhere in the world. This is going to come later on. You're going to see more and more people doing this, more and more companies accepting Bitcoin, merchants accepting Bitcoin for their products and services. One Bitcoin can also be split into 100 million smaller units called Satoshis. And this is, I think, the end game. So what people will do is they'll price the things that they're selling in Satoshis. Today, you can buy maybe a car for, let's say, 25 million, 30 million, 35 million Satoshis. So 0.3 Bitcoin or so. Today, one Bitcoin is worth $90,000. So essentially, you're valuing that 0.3 Bitcoin at about $27,000. At some point, as more people want Bitcoin and as more players like Vanguard come into the system and allow more people to access Bitcoin, the value of that 0.3 Bitcoin is going to rise, while we'll be able to create more and more cars. We'll be able to build more and more cars, sell those cars into the market. So what you're going to see is this 21 million Bitcoin supply or 2.1 quadrillion Satoshis is going to rise in value. you'll be going from paying 0.3 Bitcoin per car to, let's say, 0.2, then 0.1, then 0.05. And the best thing here is today you're paying 0.3 Bitcoin for that car. In a few years, you'll be paying 0.05 Bitcoin, and it'll be a much better version of that car. The same thing applies to houses. So let's say, for example, you can buy a house for 3 to 5 Bitcoin today. At some point, you'll be able to buy a much, much bigger house for 3 to 5 Bitcoin on a much bigger plot of land, or the same house that costs 3 to 5 Bitcoin today will cost 0.3 Bitcoin. Of course, this is the end game. Like I said, this is going to be merchants offering their goods and services for Bitcoin because there will be no other way to accumulate it. Fiat currencies will have died, but this is maybe 50, 60, 70 years out from now. Right now, the biggest advantage you have is that you can trade your pieces of paper, which you can borrow against other assets, for Bitcoin. Once the wealthy figure out that they have all of this equity in their houses that they can put into Bitcoin, it's game over for individuals who want to get to 1 Bitcoin, who want to get to 0.1 Bitcoin. At that point, there will be a lot less Bitcoin available for you to buy. I think at some point, the average person will earn less than 10,000 Satoshis in their entire life. So what Bitcoin does is it gives you access to this Bitcoin network. It gives you access to this asset that you can store value in without having it stolen from you. You can send and receive value anywhere in the world. This is a global network of nodes, merchants, and consumers. If you save in Bitcoin, you would be a consumer at some point. If you accept Bitcoin for your goods and services, you are a Bitcoin merchant. If you own Bitcoin, you can transact with anyone selling goods and services for Bitcoin. And over time, the things that they sell you will become higher quality and they'll get cheaper and cheaper. In terms of Bitcoin, because what Bitcoin does is it makes merchants prosperous. They can improve their product to a point where their customers won't want any alternatives. So the people who are rejecting Bitcoin have this view in their mind. It's their ego, it's their perception of the world, it's how they see the world working out. They have this view that anything of value has to have a physical appearance. It has to be something that you can touch. It has to be something that you can use in real life. But all that money is it's a record for who owes what to whom or who owns what. Bitcoin is that record. Bitcoin is that ledger, and you own currency on that ledger, and everybody in the world agrees that you own it. So again, what Bitcoin does is it allows us to transact with anybody in the world at any time without having to ask permission. You don't have to wait for your bank to open up. You don't have to go into your physical bank. You have full control over that. And Vanguard would be that institution that holds your Bitcoin for you if you don't want to take responsibility over your Bitcoin. Eventually, everybody in the world is going to capitulate. Everybody in the world is going to want to own Bitcoin. They're going to need to own Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't need you. You need Bitcoin. You can reject Bitcoin as long as you want to, but eventually you're going to fall into that path where you buy Bitcoin or you're going to die. Once you're gone, the people who come after you probably aren't going to see the world the same way as you are. Let's say you accumulate a bunch of land today or a bunch of houses today. If you pass them on to your kids, the chances of them keeping those houses and not exchanging them for Bitcoin drops with every single generation. As your children, your grandchildren, your great grandchildren see the value of that real estate dropping in terms of Bitcoin, they're going to want to get rid of that real estate to buy Bitcoin with it because Bitcoin will give them a lot more optionality. So either you adopt Bitcoin or you die. Vanguard is the perfect example of a company that chose to survive rather than letting their ego get in the way of their survival.